Hello audio geeks, welcome to the channel. It's Genesis. Today we're going to review the Hidizs MS5. So this review is based on a pre-production unit sent by Hidizs, but on the thoughts and opinions of my own. They have no input on the content of this video, and they would be watching this video the first time along with you guys. So in this review, we're going to talk about the comfort, build quality, accessories, and then we're going to talk about a subjective listening experience. And after that, we're going to go to the review desk over there to talk about the frequency response and do some comparison so that we can draw some conclusions. So let's get started. First, let's talk about build quality and comfort. So these IEM are very well built. The earpiece are not large, so they wouldn't stretch your ears. They wouldn't make your ear feel very stuffy and tired after listening session, such as when you use Theorio Monarch or Moondrop Blessing 2. However, the comfort of these IM would depend a great deal on how deep you choose to wear them and the cable that you use. So as you can see, the nozzle of this IM is a little bit longer than average. So if you fit them deeply, they can get a little bit uncomfortable, partially because how thick the nozzle actually is. However, for me, I use this SpinFit W1 and I wear them shallowly, so I have larger soundstage and better comfort as well. Isolation is surprisingly good, even though this IM seems to be semi-opened. I'm not very sure because the isolation is better than expected. The second issue that might be troublesome for you is the cable. So for me, the cable itself is excellent. It is very high quality, it's thick, the braiding is nice, individual cable is very nice looking, and the hardware is top quality. However, the problem with this cable is with the ear hook. You can see it's very tight. So when I use this cable and wear it over my ears, this cable would pinch the IEMs against this part of my ears, and the cable would also tighten up this part and behind my ears. So after around 1 hour listening, it would start to get very uncomfortable. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove the ear hook. And I think just by changing the ear hook, this cable would be usable. So Hidizs, if you're watching this video, please be less aggressive with the ear hook in the future. Next, let's talk about tonality. So by tonality, I mean two aspects. The first aspect is the tone, the naturalness of different instruments that you listen to. It can be a rock band, it can be orchestra. So is that warm? Is that cold? Is that natural? Is that unusual? So that is one aspect of tonality. The other aspect of tonality is the balance. So for example, you're listening to a rock band. What is the balance between the kick drum, the bass guitar, the singer, the guitar, and the cymbals? Is the bass drum overpowering the rest of the band, or is that the singer who is overpowering the rest of the band? So that kind of balance. So for the tonality of MS5, I would say this IM has a U-shaped tuning. So it means you will hear more bass, more kick drums, more guitar, more bass guitar. And on the other hand, you also have more treble response. So that means you will hear more cymbals, hi-hats, chimes. And the mid-range, where the vocals and other instruments exist, is in the middle. The reason why this IM is U-shaped rather than V-shaped is because the mid-range is still relatively flat, just slightly warm, around 3 dB above neutral. So for me, if an IM is V-shaped like this, then you would hear a lot of sound because like the bass bleeding into the mid-range. But at the same time, the vocal can be very harsh and very in your face because they would boost the upper mid range very early as well. But that's not the case with this IM. It's relatively flat, and on the vocals and instruments are also not up against your face like how you would hear with IMs that are tuned according to a Harman target, diffuse field, or your usual moon drop IMs. Like for those IM, the vocals are very upfront right here. But this IM is more along the line of the U12T or Andromeda. So everything is a little bit laid back, a little bit away from you. So for me, I enjoy this kind of presentation more because I mostly listen to orchestral music and soundtrack when I want a large soundscape around me rather than right here. However, the tonality of this IM is not perfect. It has some sense of unnaturalness in the treble response. I think the reason is the 8 kHz region, the mid treble, is a little bit imbalanced with the lower treble around 5 kHz. So what that means is, for example, when you're listening to a cymbal, so usually you will hear a strong stick attack and then the body of the cymbal. Psst. But with this IM, you hear a lot of psst, but not very strong stick attack. So it sounds splashy, it can sound unnatural. So for example, when the other day, I was listening to Goat by Bolivia. So everything was fine until the drums started to play, until I hear the first cymbals. Immediately, I was like, wait a minute, this is not right. And there's another orchestral piece that I listened to. It opens with hand claps. And when I hear the hand claps, immediately I was like, this is not right. Something is not quite right here. However, most of the time, and with most of my library, that treble problem doesn't exist or not very prominent. So most of the time, I have very little problem with the treble response, unless the music hits just right. Next, let's talk about the bass response. The bass response of these IMs are excellent. So it has, how can I say, a good balance between the sub bass and the mid bass. And the total amount of bass is good, and the quality of the bass is also good. So for example, do you remember the iconic opening of the Hotel California with the kick drum? So with this IM, I can hear a very strong, clear attack at the beginning of the kick. There's like, you can think there's a snap at the top, and then the decay of the kick drum is very clean. So let's say we have multiple kicks, the sound would be something like this rather than like this. So clean but strong bass response. Another nice thing about bass response is at the decay end of the bass attack, there's a sense of resonance. So for example, the kick, you hear boom, that resonance, that vibration, you feel it spreading. You feel that bass spreading across the soundstage, at the floor of the soundstage. So the feeling of the bass is good. And as another example is the opening theme of the Skyrim. So in that opening theme, there's a strong rhythmic. So in that, another example is the opening of the Skyrim theme, where they use a big, powerful war drum as the base, as the foundation of the music. So with this IM, you can hear a strong sense of rumble. But at the same time, you can hear the clear attack at the beginning of every hit on the drum. So it is different from, say, the T-Audio Monarch. When with the Monarch, you will feel more rumble. So With the monarch, you always feel like some kind of rumble in your throat when you listen to that piece. But at the same time, the attack is not very clear with the monarch. So at some point, you take a step back and you listen to the music and you say, where's the attack? Most of the time, it's just rumble without clear opening, starting, ending of the drum. So good bass for this IEM, especially for people who listen to soundtracks, video game, movie soundtrack like I do. Next, let's talk about resolution. So what does that mean by the resolution of an IEM? To me, the resolution has two aspects. The first aspect is separation, or the definition of the musical note. So think of it this way. The separation is important when the music is dense. So for example, if the music is very sparse, you can put an instrument right here, an instrument and another instrument right here, and they would have a strong separation because they are placed at different places on the soundstage. The true separation is required when the music is very dense and then the instruments start to overlap each other. So for example, uh, singers and the band, they're located at the same place on the soundstage, multiple instruments at the same place. So with good separation, you would be able to pick and follow individual instruments, even though they overlap on the soundstage. For example, you can easily follow the singer. If you want to, you can easily focus and follow the guitar or the bass or the kick drum. But if you have poor separation or poor notes definition, and everything feels very mushy, soupy. Everything just mashed together into one mush. So that is separation or macro detail. The micro detail retrieval is about the nuance, the little details that make up the richness of the instruments and the other sounds that you listen in the music. So for example, with good micro detail retrieval, you can hear more details from a singer. You can hear the breath, you can hear the mouth sound, you can even hear the singer shifting around, moving her music in the recording booth. Alright, now it might sound creepy, but actually it is very helpful if you listen to classical recording or orchestral music, because a strong sense of micro detail would make the music more real, as if you were sitting right there next to the instrument and you pick up on the little details. So, how about this MS5? So I find that these IEMs has good resolution on both aspects. In some recording, it might feel like this IEM can touch the upper level of the market, like the top cream when we think about this resolution, like the U12T, the Andromeda, sometimes. But most of the time, this IEM would play more at the level of the Blessing 2 and similar IEMs. So when the music gets crowded, you can still follow different parts, different instruments with some effort, not effortlessly. And but the good things about this IEM, which for me is a little bit better than all the options around this level, is the micro detail retrieval. So for example, when I listen to a flute partita, so if you haven't listened to a flute partita, think of it as a very sparse music with only one flute, like flute solo, and a musician, a flute, and the sound of the flute bouncing off the wall of the recording studio or the recording hall. So that bouncing sound would create like the accompany for the flute itself. So if you listen to that kind of music, you need to have a lot of nuances and details. Otherwise, it's kind of boring. So I had good experience listening to flute partita in A minor with these IEMs. And similarly, I also have good experience listening to violin sonatas, violin partitas by Bach, and orchestral music sounds great. So to me, the resolution is good enough for the kind of music that I listen, particularly orchestral music and video game and movie soundtrack. That's something that with a lot of instruments and requires details. Finally, let's talk about soundstage and imaging. So what does that mean? By soundstage, I talk about a virtual sphere of sound around your head when you listen to these instruments, to these IEMs. By imaging, I'm talking about the placement of instruments within that virtual sphere. So good imaging would have very pinpoint direction of the instrument, would have a strong sense of contrast between the closer and further away. You will have width, you have depth, you have height, and IEMs with excellent treble response can even trick you into thinking that the last layer, the background layer of the sound stage exists somewhere in the environment around you. So IEMs that can achieve that kind of presentation to me is something with holographic quality. So how's the soundstage and imaging of the MS5? In my opinion, it is actually pretty good because of the way the mid-range was tuned to be more laid back. When I listen to orchestral music and movies and video game soundtrack, I can feel the orchestra to take a step away from me. So it's not always in your face. The music is not always too close in. So there's a better sense of space. The contrast between closer and further away sound is also stronger. So for example, when I listen to, say, Hotel California, the singer and the band have some distance from each other. And at the same time, both of them have distance from the cheers of the audience at the background of the soundstage. And if I listen to a string quartet, when the music is mixed so that the cello is on one side of the stage, violin is on the other side of the stage, and the viola and other instruments are here, I can feel like the cello's on this side of my shoulder, and the violin is on this side of my shoulder. It's as if I can reach and grab the sound from the air. And when I listen to some music with cymbals and hi-hats, for example, Hotel California again, I can feel the cymbals and hi-hats flying above my head. So there's a 3D sense of stage to the soundstage. This is the frequency response graph of MS5. In case this is the first time you have seen a frequency response graph, let me give you a quick overview. Essentially, this graph shows you the loudness of an IEM response to signal at different frequency. On this side, we have lower notes, such as bass guitar, bass drum. On this side, we have higher notes, such as cymbals and hi-hats. Around here, the mid-range region, from 250 Hz on the way to 4 kHz, this is where all the instruments and vocals exist. So what can this graph tell you? Essentially, it tells you the tonal balance of an IEM or the signature of an IEM. It can tell you whether an IEM has a lot of bass, lots of treble, flat mid-range, and all kinds of information. That would give you an idea how an IEM would sound like. So let's get back to the topic, the MS5. The overall tonality of MS5 can be described as balanced and U-shaped. What I mean is MS5 have a lot of bass response. At the same time, it has a lot of treble response, and the mid-range is relatively flat and sandwiched in the middle between the bass and the treble response. Let's have a closer look at the mid-range. The mid-range of MS5 have a certain level of warmth to it based on the lift, the boost around 250 Hz that you can see here. At the same time, it is, how can I say, it is laid back. So it means the vocal Instruments are not very loud, are not very forward and in your face. The reason is this region. This region from 1 kilohertz on the way to 4 kilohertz, usually there's a big hump around here, which is called the ear gain region or pinna compensation. Usually they have to add the response around here to mimic how your face and your ears would respond to the sound from the environment. So a correct response would have around 12 dB boost around this area. What MS5 does is to reduce the ear gain to only around 5 decibels, even though it is still placed at the correct place. So the mid-range is still relatively correct. That means vocals sound normal, instruments sound natural, but it is not forward and it's not very loud. Now let's talk about the bass response. The bass of MS5 can be described as big, bold, but natural. A lot of the bass energy of MS5 is focused in the sub-bass region, around this area. So it has 10 dB boost above the neutral line. So that means you will feel the rumble. You will feel the physical impact of the bass. At the same time, the mid-bass region around here, 150 Hz, is also elevated and not very far behind from the sub-bass, only around 4 dB different. So that means you will hear the bass as well. So for example, when the bass guitar or the bass drum, when there's a kick on the bass drum, you will hear the boom sound. And at the same time, you will feel the kick in your throat and in your chest. So, good bass response, in my opinion. And the bass doesn't cut off abruptly, but it meshes naturally into the mid-range. So the overall sound would be more cohesive. Now, let's talk about the treble response. This area, in my opinion, is make or break of MS5 to you. The treble response of MS5 is unusual for this price bracket, even though it is more usual if you look at the $1,000, $2,000 earphone. The reason is the treble is higher than the ear gain compensation. It is very rare. Usually the ear gain is higher and the treble would fall off like this. What would this tell you? So the treble is high, peaking at 5 kHz, 8 kHz, and 16 kHz. The 5 kHz is the presence region, so it would give a lot of snappiness, clarity to the attack of the musical note. For example, you will hear a stronger response, stronger snap sound of the plucking of the guitar. The second peak is 8 kHz region. The purpose of this one is to emphasize the body of the cymbals and hi-hat. For example, it would be easier for you to follow a pattern when the drummer plays, and when the whole band plays together, this treble response can create a sense of sparkle and shimmering of the cymbals and hi-hat in the background around you. So I like this kind of response because it gives some special effect to the sound. So despite the advantages, this treble response also have two disadvantages. The first one is sibilance. That means when singer hits words like with sh or s in the sound, those sh can be emphasized, so it can be uncomfortable. The second problem is because the treble is higher than the ear gain, so some instrument, especially cymbals, hi-hat, some notes on the flute or violin can sound a little bit unnatural. The hand clapping sound can also sound a little bit unusual because usually you will hear more of 3 kHz than the treble region. In real world listening, the problem is not as severe as we can expect when we look at the graph. The third peak in the treble response of MS5 is around 16 kHz. I really like this kind of treble response because it would emphasize the sound of instrument bouncing off the recording studio or the recording hall. It will create a sense of soundstage. It will make the sound more 3D, more around you. The tonality of MS5 is very unique. I couldn't find any IEM with exactly the same response as this IEM. However, some characteristics of MS5 can be found in other IEMs. For example, the relaxed midrange reminds me of the U12T and the Andromeda. However, MS5 is warmer than the U12T. At the same time, it is colder than the Andromeda. The IEM with the closest response to MS5 would probably be the Noble Audio Kublai Khan. Here you can see the graph of these two IEMs overlapping each other. So Kublai Khan is also have a very big and bold bass response, with most of energy focused in the sub-bass region. And it also have a lot of treble response with more relaxed mid-range. In summary, the tonality of MS5 is unique and somewhat divisive. The relative imbalance between upper mid-range and the treble, along with the sheer amount of treble, might cause discomfort to certain listeners with certain genres. On the other hand, I find this overall tonality works very well with orchestral music, with movie and video game soundtracks, the kind of music that I listen all the time. So in conclusion, to me personally, this is still a good tonality. Alright, let's do some comparison so that we can see how MS5 fit into a bigger picture of the market. So the way that I review and rate these IEMs is that I would compare them in direct A/B testing between them and some well-known IEMs that I have chosen as the benchmark. So this is the Moondrop Aria, the Blessing 2, the Andromeda, the U12T. And I would do the A/B test on 4 different aspects: the tonality, the resolution, the bass response, and the soundstage. And how it works is, if an IEM match the level of this benchmark, then it would be within this bucket. If it goes, even if it's somewhere in the middle, unless this IEM is very close to the next level, otherwise it would be rated in this level. But if it passed to the next level, then it would be moved to the next level. Right, now first, let's talk about a tonality comparison. So when I did the A/B test of MS5 against the Aria and the Blessing 2, the first thing that I noticed is the, the laid-backness of the mid-range of these IEMs. So for example, when I switch from MS5 to the Aria, when I listen to the third movement of the Summer Violin Concerto by Vivaldi, so immediately I feel the orchestra is more in my face, more forward with the aria comparing to this one. So both aria and Blessing 2 have the same kind of presentation. The violins still sound correct with the MS5. So when I switch quickly between the MS5 and the aria, immediately I feel the aria is splashier and it is more, let's say, in your face, even a little bit nasally. But after a while, of course, our brain would get used to the sound quickly. But if we just judge the sound based on the mid-range, then I think MS5 has done a good job with the mid-range. But as I mentioned, the treble response of this IEM can be a bit unusual. That would lead to very strange tonality of high-pitch instruments like cymbals, hi-hat, sometimes. So, how do I rate the tonality of MS5? I would say, because it has done a very good job at making the sound more laid-back, more easygoing, and improve the sense of stage. So, and it is at the same time it's also different from many of the new releases that we have seen up to this moment. So from that angle, it is somewhat the 4 or 5 level to me. But at the same time, I cannot ignore the unnatural cymbals and hi-hat. And on a high-pitched instrument like trumpet, of course, it doesn't happen all the time, but it's there. And also there's a possibility of sibilance of certain track because of those strong response in the treble region. So in conclusion, I would say tonality is around here. 3 out of 5. Adequate. Next, let's talk about the bass response. So for this test, we're going to take this Andromeda out of the question. So for this test, we have 3 out of 5 the aria, 4 out of 5 the blessing 2, and 5 out of 5 the U12T. So let me explain. So when you go up from aria to the U12T, the attack of the bass note becomes sharper. But at the U12T, you have very sharp attack, but at the same time, you also have a strong sense of rumble and decay at the end, the other side of the bass attack. With the blessing 2, you have strong attack, you feel a strong sub-bass response, but there's not a lot of texture and detail. So that's why average, acceptable, good, excellent. So where's MS5? So as I mentioned in the subjective impression, the bass has strong attack, strong decay, and to me, a satisfying sensation to create the ambience of the orchestra and other soundtrack. This MS5 has snappier attack than aria. It has better decay than the Blessing 2. It is a bit more physical than the U12T because this is the dynamic driver inside. So I would say somewhere around here for me. Outstanding, 5 out of 5. Next, let's talk about the resolution. For this, we bring the Andromeda back in. So 3 out of 5, 4 out of 5, 5 out of 5, outstanding. And the Andromeda is something that I would say 4.5 out of 5. It is very good, but it's not on this level yet. The problem with the Andromeda is any frequency below 1000 Hertz. That whole region feels a little bit soft and not very well resolving compared to the rest of the response. Meanwhile, this one, it was tuck sharp throughout the whole range. So, how about the MS5? If we just look at MS5 from the major macro resolution or the separation point of view, in A/B test, this IEM features around this level of the Blessing 2. So when I listen to Presto, the summer third movement of the summer violin concerto by Vivaldi, is immediately clear without even a lot of effort to see that the separation of instruments and the clarity, the tack sharp cutting separation of the violin and other string instruments is way stronger. Noticeably stronger with MS5 comparing to the aria. However, and without comparing with the Blessing 2, my assumption is this MS5 will be somewhere around here, or perhaps even somewhere around here. But when I do some very careful testing, and I realize that the MS5 is somewhere around the Blessing 2 level on the separation. Because the sound stage of this one is more laid back and more spacious. So at first, I think that this IEM have better separation than the Blessing 2. However, when the music is dense and very tight packed together, so that is when the space advantage of the MS5 is not that strong comparing to the Blessing 2, and they would compete solely on the ability to separate instruments. Then I found that they are mostly the same. For example, the presto movement that I mentioned, nearly the same. So that is on the macro resolution or separation level. Now how about the micro detail retrieval? So for that test, I use some classical recording that is rich in detail, but very sparse. So you cannot rely on separation and that kind of thing to improve the perceptions of detail. So now we're looking at pure detail retrieval. So after very careful test, I would say this IEM is somewhere around here. It is noticeably more texture and more detail than the Blessing 2 with certain classical recording. For example, the flute partita in A minor, as I mentioned. Maybe it would be somewhere around here, but it's not here yet. So in general, I would say the macro resolution, the separation is sorted 4 out of 5. The micro detail retrieval a little bit better than 4 out of 5. So I think this IEM would be somewhere around here. So in conclusion, still resolution 4 out of 5. Good. Finally, let's talk about soundstage and imaging. So for this test, the benchmark is something like this. So we have 3, 4, 5. So what is the difference between these levels? With the aria, everything would be the soundstage of the aria is none of these IEM have very small congested soundstage. But the difference is in terms of the accuracy of the imaging and the layering and the depth. So for the aria, to me, I don't hear a very strong sense of depth. So it has width, but it doesn't have depth. And the layering is not very strong. So everything kind of more mushed together. It's like a whole foggy stage around in the middle, around my head. With the Blessing 2, the sense of layering is much stronger. The width is, I would say, roughly the same, but the layering is much stronger. But the sense of depth, like how much distance we go from to the front of us, is still roughly the same. So the problem to me is this 2 IEM feels a little bit flat. So when we reach the level of these two, 5 out of 5, we have width, we have depth, we have strong sense of layering, we have height, and both of these also have the uncanny ability to throw the last layer of the soundstage. For example, the audience cheering, the sound of flute bouncing off the wall, that kind of sound. These two have the ability to fling those sounds to the environment around you, to trick you into thinking that something is outside the ears. So that's why they are here. So in the way I usually describe, I would say these IEM are 3D. So how does MS5 fit into this benchmark? So when I did A/B test, it's immediately clear that MS5 is better than the aria. When you go to the aria, immediately when you listen to an orchestral piece like the presto, everything feels that it's pressed together with the aria. Very difficult to split the stage, pinpoint the instrument. It's not very fun with this one. This is better. So when I compare to Blessing 2, again, there's a stronger sense of depth. The ability to pinpoint the instrument on the stage is not too different between these ones. But because of the tuning, MS5 would have more depth, everything a little bit more further away. The closer and the further away instruments are more contrasty. So you feel this is closer, this is further away, rather than more together, shallower with the MS5. So the most important question is whether this one belongs to this category. So I did a lot of A/B tests to carefully compare, and I would say not really. Both of these IEM produce a stronger sense of pinpoint accuracy of the instrument, and both of these can create that illusion of the sound in the environment. MS5, it doesn't have the ability to convey that sense of sound in the environment as often as these two. The accuracy of imaging is also a little bit less than these two, but I would say it's certainly somewhere in the middle. Definitely noticeably better than the Blessing 2 level to my ears. Not there yet, somewhere around here. So I would say for soundstage and imaging would be 4.5 out of 5. Very good. For people like me who like to have a sense of space, a sense of detail and separation in their music. So I've been using this IEM as everyday carry so that I can leave this one at home. And usually, everyday carry has a sense of compromise. When you come home, you put this on and you say, oh yeah. But for this IEM, I don't feel a lot of lacking when I come back and I compare with these two. It's not because they are on exactly the same level, but because this IEM provide the staging and resolution to the level that makes me satisfied. So to me, they are very good IEMs when you listen to orchestral music, classical, something with the space, something with like movie soundtrack, space, detail, rumble of the bass. Because of the unusual treble response, they can be tricky if you listen to vocal or if you listen to rock band. If you, like I mentioned, if you keep focusing on the cymbals and hi-hats, you usually you will find that the cymbals and hi-hat are not exactly natural sometimes. So that's all that I have to say about the MS5. I hope that it has been helpful. Let me know if you have any question in the comments. See you next time.